the fraud in Ohio was getting worse by the second. So as a quick reminder, the primaries in Ohio were today. That included the gubernatorial. Obviously, we saw Vice President J.D. Vance casting his ballot.
I have to hide it from the reporters. I don't want them to know who I voted for.
That kind of stuff there. The situation regarding the fraud in Ohio today has kind of changed how this race is covered. And I should say these races are covered. So, for example, Vivek Ramaswamy running for governor. I believe that Yost has, if hasn't conceded yet, is conceded by now because Vivek has been officially endorsed by the Ohio Republican Party, President Trump, etc. Originally, Vivek was doing these styles of interviews, for example, over on Will Cain today.
Oh, look, there's an absolute market for it, but the job of leaders is to actually lead people in a positive direction rather than playing to their basest instincts. And let's talk about this debate about capitalism, Will. I think this is long overdue. I think we as leaders, particularly in the Republican Party, need to make the case for capitalism, the greatest system known to the history of man to lift people up from poverty.
Okay, so that brings us to the rather, I mean, there's no better way to say it, the dumpster fire regarding Governor DeWine's lack of leadership here, at least his administration's lack of leadership regarding this Somali fraud. So Luke Rosiak from the Daily Wire has been teaming up with Parker Thayer over from the Capital Research Center. Both are excellent guys to dive into this latest scheme of Medicare and Medicaid fraud that just may be rife all over the entire country. Because if you simply say, hey, I'm totally caring for my relatives and stuff, and give me money from Medicare and Medicaid, there are a lot of places like Ohio, for example, where Somali communities set up huge shell companies where they stuffed hundreds of these shell companies into corporate parks and big office buildings and then like blocked out all of the windows. And we're trying to get Luke Rosiak on later this week to kind of give us a bit of a detail. But in just one or two locations, as they're going through all of these various locations where these members of the Somali community and surrounding countries have participated in this massive alleged Medicare and Medicaid fraud, that all of the office owners filing $250 million worth of Medicaid firm stuff, 288 of them, of these firms. One landlord alone owns 7 buildings in Columbus. So he's kind of getting into some of the details on this particular mess. There's one particular politician who said that, I mean, he had one job, and then on a totally different level, like his side gig, was this $11 million scheme that he didn't even mention in his bio. It's just rife with mess. And so the reason I bring this up is that when you get over to Parker Thayer's side of the investigation, when they were walking through the abandoned room, you know, the abandoned building where all of these Somali offices supposedly are.
So let's go down the hallway. We've got the Somali Education Resource Center. Baby Boomers Healthcare, let me tell you how much they got. $6 million to Ad Sirak Yusuf.
So just the entire building's empty. This little issue right here, this letter from the Office of Bureau of Criminal Investigations from the Attorney General, there's a bit of an issue here. Parker Thayer from the Capital Research Center pointed out, in one of these supposed bustling offices of home care that are just empty buildings that you should totally not look at whatsoever, there was a letter they found. And this letter, I'll read the tweet verbatim here. It says, "You just can't make this stuff up. We were walking through one of these buildings and found a notice letter from the Ohio Attorney General's Bureau of Criminal Investigations just sitting out in the open, untouched. It was from 5 months ago, and nobody had been by the office." Now, two things you can take away from this. Number one, you can say nobody had been by the office from the office itself. The letter was sent to actually pick it up because it's just closed. Hey, just give us the money. Who cares? The question that I had is, what on God's green earth is the Attorney General's office of Ohio doing? What are they doing? I seem to remember that in my home state of Indiana, Attorney General Todd Rokita and Secretary of State Diego Morales, after being called to do an investigation into voter fraud, did an investigation into voter fraud. And in one election, they found over 20 cases of voter fraud. It wasn't the huge, amazing, magical number that a lot were expecting, but they did the investigation, and they were roasted for that. I saw an Attorney General's office and a Secretary of State's office acting on the request and doing the investigation. You are telling me that 5 months ago, the Attorney General's office of the state of Ohio, under Governor DeWine's administration, said, hey, there seem to be some issues. You're in this building, crammed in there like old Mother Hubbard and the shoe, with all different kinds of these other definitely totally real Somali home healthcare wink organizations. You want to tell us what's going on and why you're taking millions and millions and millions of dollars? And they sent the letter, and then nothing happened. Incredible. This is where I think things start to get from rubber to meeting the road. So Vivek Ramaswamy, again, big primary day. He's going to be in charge of the next administration. Now the election becomes about how you would handle the fraud. That's a totally different thing, because Vivek's opponent on the Democrat side of the aisle, so far we've heard all Democrats completely discount fraud and say that actually Republicans are being super mean and stinky and racist if they ask about it. But yet it's, again, the only plan that Democrats have brought forward as a policy for Americans when they say, hey, how are we going to afford X, Y, and Z? The argument that's brought forward by Democrats is, well, we're going to have the government pay for more stuff. And then Vivek Ramaswamy runs out in a month and announces they're all out of money again and they have to raise your taxes now. But alas, this is what the election is going to pivot to. Vivek Ramaswamy went on with Ben Shapiro today, and this is what the question was, and here's how Vivek addressed it.
What do you make of that, and what would you do as governor of Ohio to crack down on that?
So look, I think that the reality is all states, including Ohio, I think have turned a blind eye to this level of rampant fraud of the welfare system broadly, including Medicaid. And it starts, Ben, with enforcing the laws that are already on the books. So you can talk about passing new laws. I think that's a reasonable conversation to have, but that requires a legislature. That takes time. And furthermore, you got to ask the question of what's the point of passing new laws if the ones that are already on the books aren't being sufficiently enforced? So one of my top priorities is to take the egregious cases here of fraud that, frankly, your reporting was really intriguing, or, Daily Wire's reporting was really intriguing to me. I wish I could.
That's the Luke Rosiak story.
Say that it was a shock compared to what I hear on the ground. Unfortunately, it was not a shock, but I appreciate you putting a national spotlight on it in my own home state. And I think what that does is it forces those who are in power to be able to pay attention to an issue that may have been swept under the rug for too long before.
Okay. I agree with him and I disagree with him. So first of all, he says, a lot of people are saying, hey, we need new laws, but you need to enforce the laws on the books. That's great. I've heard that before. Okay, good to go. Grand, excellent, neat. When the Ohio state legislature could absolutely pass bills that circumvent or realistically overshadow the federal government. The word I was looking for might have been, I don't think superimpose fits there. That was hence the little hesitation there. They could supersede the federal government and essentially say, if you are caught doing some kind of fraud, we immediately turn you over for possible immigration issues. States have done that before. I believe Oklahoma does that. I believe the state of Texas does that. Florida absolutely does that. You could pass that kind of legislation. But the argument is this is really, really good because it puts a national spotlight and it forces people in power to pay attention. What was Governor DeWine's office doing amid all of this stuff 5 months ago when we know they knew about it based on those letters? I mean, unless they're reaching out via the Attorney General's office to say, hey, have you considered a question about your car's extended warranty? I mean, at some point, you do actually have to ask when Republicans, Democrats, whoever are going to do the accountability holding that they're running on during the election. And the reason I say this is that, for example, the Indiana governor's office, I will never, ever, ever forget going to the primary back when Braun was running in 24. And I went and I sat down and I listened to Suzanne Crouch, she's the former lieutenant governor, and then I heard Mike Braun and then Jamie Rettenauer and other candidates who I have long since forgotten, who have told me all of the wonderful things they were going to do. And I remember that when Braun got up to speak, it was a very hands-off approach as governor. And there's a lot to be said for that. On an economic standpoint, a lot of people want to be left alone. They want things to develop. But in a lot of our states, there has been this attitude that, well, the fraud's either at a federal level or there's so much abundance in a lot of red states, we can afford a bunch of this fraud. And, you know, I mean, better not to rock the boat and be accused of being a racist. Oh no, if my local USA Today paper affiliate calls me a racist, oh no, that kind of crap. That's not what voters want anymore. The era of just like, as long as the Chamber of Commerce is happy, voters will be happy, that age is leaving.